Welcome back. New Jersey's Senate race just keeps getting more and more interesting. Last week, Congressman Rob Andrews took a hit from Senator Lautenberg for his early support of the Iraq War. Lautenberg's camp produced a commercial that said that Congressman Andrews was enlisted by President Bush to co-author a war resolution. And on the GOP side, former Congressman Dick Zimmer, who officially kicked off his campaign about a week ago, is being accused of campaign fraud by his opponent, State Senator Joe Pannaccio. And with me now is Matt Friedman. He's the reporter for PoliticsNJ.com, and Joe Marbach, a political science professor for Seton Hall University, joins us again. So thank you both for being here. Let's talk about Congressman Andrews first. Does his early support of the Iraq War hurt him in this race?
I think it does. Senator Lautenberg was also an Iraq War supporter when he was campaigning for the seat that he had initially retired from. So it doesn't put him at this great advantage, but the difference between him and Rob Andrews is that he had come out once he entered office a few months later, maybe 6 months later, came out as a vigorous opponent of the war, whereas Congressman Andrews stayed as a supporter of the war up until at least 2005. So Lautenberg turned against the war before public opinion did. Andrews turned against the war while public opinion did. So
and that still remains a critical issue in the minds of voters. And if you just go back to the last election, Senator Menendez made that the central point of his campaign, and it carried him through to an overwhelming victory against Tom Kean Jr.
And Lautenberg is really putting attention on this particular point as he goes through the campaign right now, isn't he?
And this is probably the main point we're going to hear until June 3rd.
Yeah. Because this is what distinguishes them as Democrats, too. I mean, this is going to be the central issue. You can't argue that one's more liberal or one's more moderate than the other. They're right. About the same. So.
Well, Andrews is trying to campaign now as well, in that the past it's 18 months to 2 years, as I think we said, that he's really looking for solutions on the other side to be out of Iraq and to do that thing. Will voters have confidence in that?
Well, this is his way of neutralizing the issue. He needs to get out in front of this and say, look, it's not about the past where we were 2 years ago. This is about how we're going to get out of it. And to his credit, he does have some sort of plan, somewhat specific. And Senator Lautenberg doesn't have a plan either. Now, Lautenberg's camp will criticize him for never actually introducing it and just saying he has a plan. To say, well, we can all have ideas on what to do in Iraq. What are you actually trying to do about it?
Yeah, and again, a member of Congress is only going to have limited impact in devising that strategy anyway. And when we saw it in previous campaigns, I mentioned Menendez's campaign, he had a plan for what he called over the horizon. Nothing came of it, but you have to present to the voters that you've been thinking about this issue, that you've got an idea to address it, and that if elected, you're going to try to implement it.
So does one of them have a better plan for just that, building the confidence in the mind of voters?
Well, I would think Andrews does, because at least he says he has a plan. You haven't heard anything out of the Lautenberg camp about talking about what kind of withdrawal strategy he would endorse. And
we know that Lautenberg, as you mentioned, wasn't actually in office at the time that the vote came to be, and that he was, as Andrews calls it, finger-pointing after the fact, saying that anyone who supported it, is obviously a bad person, or however he would put it. But Andrews and Lautenberg at this time are now doing all this finger-pointing as far as, well, you should have said this, you should have done this. How does that resonate with voters?
Well, I think when you're getting down to the liberal Democratic base that tends to turn out in these primaries, it actually does matter. Now, there are basically going to be two issues in this campaign. One of them is the Iraq War, and one of them is that Frank Lautenberg is 84 years old. Rob Andrews needs to do as much as he can to limit the damage on the Iraq War issue, because he is more vulnerable than Lautenberg on that, just by virtue of having been such a vocal supporter and having been one of the co-authors, whether that term is exaggerated or not, of the resolution to invade Iraq. And Frank Lautenberg turned against the war way before public opinion did. But Rob Andrews will say, very subtly, again and again, that Frank Lautenberg is very old. He can't say it literally, but he will imply it throughout this campaign, and that's going to be the bulk of what we'll hear from him. At least that's my bet.
Sure, and that's how he kicked off his campaign, as one that would be energetic and vigorous, and he kept harping on those themes, and they were certainly code words for what the underlying message is.
And how will age, do we think, resonate with the voters? Does it seem to be having much of an impact, Lautenberg's age?
I think it will, if you can remind people that he is 84. If people aren't reminded of that constantly, they may overlook it. I think there have been polls. I was talking to Patrick Murray, political science professor at Monmouth University, and he told me that in his polls, if they ask if Lautenberg is too old, the people didn't necessarily say that he was, but in polls where the age was actually pointed out before they asked the question, then people did say, yes, he's too old. So Rob Andrews has to ever so subtly remind people that Lautenberg is 84 years old.
Right, and so conceptually, people are concerned about it. But if Lautenberg can show that he's as vigorous and as healthy as anyone else running for Congress, then I think he'll dispel that in the minds of voters.
And we've seen it. We've seen people talking about Frank Lautenberg playing with his new iPhone, about him coming off the ski slopes, you know, to come out of retirement, come back to the Senate when he was needed by the party. They're going to try to reinforce him as like this sort of youthful guy. Like, I don't know, there were Pepsi commercials from the early 90s with a bunch of senior citizens dancing around. You know, maybe not that drastic, but, you know.
But we can look for something like that,
exactly,
perhaps, down the line. Let's talk about the Republican side. Dick Zimmer, who is one of the candidates, says he's a moderate Republican conservative. But we're wondering first of all, what kind of chance Dick Zimmer has of getting the nomination for the, after the primaries, and then is a Republican going to get voted in New Jersey?
Yeah, two important questions, and we can't put one before the other because it is a very difficult primary, a very divided Republican Party. We've seen the counties split up. I haven't seen the last count, but it looks like it's going to be an even breakdown almost among the 21 counties. So it's not a done deal. I think what Zimmer has in his favor is that he has the electability question, that if a Republican's more electable in this time, Zimmer's most likely to be electable because Sabrin and Panaccio are just considered too conservative for the general
And he can
voters.
paint himself as moderate, as we said.
He's got a good shot in the primary, even though he's the more moderate of the three, and being more conservative tends to play well in the primary, but he has been called a taxpayer superhero by taxpayer advocacy groups. He can play up the fiscal conservatism while trying to minimize that he is pro-choice. However, it's not a sure thing for him because he came into this game so late. If he had entered 6 months ago, I think he would be the clear front runner. But right now, I'd say between him and Joe Panaccio, maybe he has a slight edge, but barely, just because of the amount of time. And
name recognition is the key. He hasn't been in office in 8 years, so I think that's really what he's got to try to remind voters, that he was effective and that he has the bona fides to represent the Republican Party.
That's right. And State Senator Panaccio actually is challenging his candidacy. I think he filed a complaint in Morris County for joining the race too late.
He did. Well, he did. He filed a complaint against Andy Unanaway's candidacy, which was dismissed recently. It was recently dismissed in court. The complaint alleged two things. One, that Andy Unanaway, who Dick Zimmer filled in for, was not expecting to run when he filed his papers and therefore didn't file them in good faith. And secondly, they signed something that said he lived in New Jersey when in fact he doesn't live in New Jersey. Justice ruled that law that he had to sign that he lived in New Jersey was unconstitutional. You just have to live in New Jersey by the time you enter office, or the election, I can't quite remember which, and that there was no way to read their minds until if Andy Unanaway had any
What's in good faith and what's not, yeah.
What's in good faith. All right, thank you again both so much for joining us. And next, with Congressman Mike Ferguson retiring from the House, a number of GOP hopefuls are vying for his spot in November's election. We will talk to one of the candidates when New Jersey Now continues. Stay tuned.